Mark sat behind his massive wooden desk, his face cold and distant. He held a thin white paper in his hand and pushed it across the table toward David. David picked it up. His eyes scanned the bold text at the top. It was a termination letter. "Pack your things," Mark said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You have 10 minutes to clear your desk and leave." David stared at his manager in disbelief. "Mark, I don't understand. I've worked here for 5 straight years. I built this company's entire server architecture from scratch. I stayed late every night this week to keep the network stable." Mark leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. "The company is cutting costs, David. Your role is no longer necessary. I can manage the system myself." David knew the real reason. Yesterday, the company approved a massive project bonus for the IT department. Mark wanted that money for himself. By firing David today, Mark could claim all the credit and steal the entire bonus. David didn't yell. He didn't slam his fists on the desk. He calmly folded the paper, placed it inside his jacket pocket, and stood up. 2 security guards were already standing at the door, waiting to escort him out like a criminal. As David walked through the open office, his colleagues looked away in silence. Nobody dared to speak up or risk their own job. Mark stood at his door, holding a cup of coffee, looking completely satisfied with himself. David carried his small box to the elevator. Before the metal doors closed, he looked back at Mark one last time. David raised his arm, looked down at his watch, and noted the exact time. It was precisely 2:00 in the afternoon. David walked out into the bright sunlight, placed his box in the trunk of his car, and drove to a small coffee shop down the street. He ordered a simple coffee, sat by the window, and waited. Inside the office, Mark walked into the server room. He felt victorious. He sat down at the main console, eager to change the administrative passwords and take full control of the network. He typed in his credentials and hit enter. Suddenly, the lights on the server racks flickered. Red warning lights began to flash rapidly across every black cabinet. High-pitched alarm tones beeped through the ceiling speakers. At exactly 4:00, precisely 2 hours after David walked out the door, every single computer screen in the entire building went black. The main trading systems crashed. The customer database vanished. The digital phone lines went dead. Hundreds of employees stared at their screens in horror. In Mark's office, his monitor flashed back on, displaying a single, glowing red error code across a dark screen. It was an error code that no one on the remaining IT team had ever seen before. Mark's hands began to shake as he realized he didn't even know where to begin. The red alarm lights flashed across the quiet office. Panic spread fast. Phones were dead, and the main website showed a server failure. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Mr. Sterling, the strict CEO, pushed open Mark's door. His face was red with anger. "What is happening, Mark?" Sterling demanded. "Clients are calling my line. We are losing $50,000 a minute." Mark wiped cold sweat from his forehead. He forced a smile, though his heart was pounding. "It is a minor glitch, sir," Mark lied smoothly. "An update went wrong. My team is fixing it. Give me 10 minutes. Sterling glared at him. 10 minutes, Mark. If the network stays down, our quarterly report is ruined." He slammed the door. Mark ran into the IT room. 3 junior technicians were typing fast. Their faces were pale. "Why isn't the system rebooting?" Mark screamed. "Bypass the lock now!" The lead technician looked up with trembling hands. "We can't, Mark. The code is encrypted. David was the only person with the keys. He built the whole framework." "Then reset the password!" Mark shouted, slamming his hand on a desk. "We tried," the technician said softly. "The system needs a physical token every 2 hours. David kept it on his drive. When you deactivated his badge, the system assumed an attack and shut down." Mark's face lost all color. He realized his fatal mistake. He had removed the only person holding up the infrastructure. Mark ran to his office, locked the door, and dialed David's number. At the coffee shop down the street, David took a sip of coffee. His phone vibrated. The screen read, Mark. David let it ring 4 times before answering. "David!" Mark exploded. "Undo whatever virus you put in the system right now!" "I didn't put a virus in the system, Mark," David said calmly. "I just left, exactly as you ordered." "If you don't return in 15 minutes and fix this, I will call the police," Mark hissed. "You will spend years in prison." David smiled, looking out the window. "You fired me, Mark. You said my role was not necessary, so manage it yourself." David hung up, turned off his phone, and pulled out the SIM card. Back at headquarters, Mark sat at David's desk to force an override. He typed his command and hit enter. A bright prompt filled the monitor. It was an automated message showing that the master key was permanently erased the second David's access badge was revoked. Mark sat frozen in his chair as police sirens began to echo from the street outside. The loud sound of police sirens echoed through the street as 2 patrol cars pulled up outside the office. Mark stood by his window, watching the flashing red lights with a grim expression. He adjusted his jacket and walked down to the lobby. Mark pointed toward David's empty desk and began telling his fabricated story. "He deliberately sabotaged our database before leaving," Mark lied smoothly. "He wiped our system out of pure spite. I want him arrested immediately." 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived at David's modest apartment and knocked on the door. When David opened it, the senior officer presented a search warrant. "David, your former employer filed a criminal complaint against you," the officer said sternly. "You are accused of launching a malicious attack on their servers." David remained calm. "You are welcome to search my home, officer," David said politely. "I have nothing to hide." The officers spent an hour searching the small apartment. They checked his laptop, scanned his external drives, and inspected his phone records for any custom hacking tools or stolen corporate files. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, the situation was turning into a nightmare. The company was losing millions of dollars. Clients were canceling contracts, and stock prices were plummeting. Mark screamed at his team to bypass the lockout, but no one could break David's encryption. Inside the apartment, the police officers finished their investigation. The lead officer turned off his scanner and looked at Mark's complaint with annoyance. "There is no evidence of sabotage here," the officer stated clearly. "His personal computer is clean. He hasn't accessed your network since 2 o'clock. David explained the truth. "I never hacked their system, officer. The servers require a manual daily maintenance routine that only I performed. When Mark fired me, he stopped that routine himself. The system simply shut down for safety." The officers apologized for the disruption and left without making an arrest. As soon as they left, David's phone vibrated. It was a text from Mark. "You got lucky today, David, but I will make sure you never work again. I will destroy your reputation and leave you in total poverty." David read the threat with a cold smile. He opened a locked drawer and pulled out a small black USB drive containing years of saved company emails and hidden financial ledgers. David was ready to launch his real counterattack. Late that night, David sat at his kitchen table, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. The black USB drive was plugged into the side port. On the screen were hundreds of downloaded files, financial logs, internal messages, and approved budget reports from the past 3 years. David opened a folder marked with Mark's full name. Inside were detailed records showing that Mark had been quietly diverting thousands of dollars from the IT maintenance fund into his own private bonus pool. Mark had repeatedly cut core security updates just to make his department look more profitable on paper. David compiled everything into a clean, easy-to-read digital document. He attached official server access logs proving that the sudden shutdown was caused by an expired software license. A license that Mark had personally refused to renew 2 months ago to save money. Instead of posting the files online or going to the media, David sent a single encrypted email directly to Sarah, the company's chief financial officer. Sarah was known across the firm as a strict zero-tolerance executive. Attached to the email was a short message from David. The server collapse was not an accident or a cyber attack. It was the direct result of gross financial mismanagement. The attached files contain the proof. Meanwhile, at headquarters, the building was practically operating in complete darkness. Millions of dollars in active trades were completely frozen. Mark spent the entire night in his office, frantically trying to draft a false report for the board of directors, desperately trying to place all the blame on David. At 7 o'clock the next morning, Sarah arrived at the office. She opened her laptop and saw David's encrypted file. As her eyes scanned the financial ledgers, her expression turned into pure anger. She realized that Mark had not only lied to the entire executive team, but his greed had brought the entire company to the brink of bankruptcy. Sarah picked up her desk phone and called an urgent, mandatory emergency meeting with the board of directors for 10 o'clock. 10 minutes before the meeting was set to start, Mark walked down the hallway, holding a thick folder filled with fake reports. He saw Sarah standing outside the boardroom doors, looking at him with a cold, unreadable face. Mark smiled, trying to sound confident. "Don't worry, Sarah," he said smoothly. "I have prepared a complete file proving David's guilt. The board will order his immediate prosecution today." Sarah looked at Mark, her voice as sharp as ice. "Walk inside, Mark. The board is waiting for you." As Mark opened the heavy boardroom doors, he felt a sudden chill run down his spine. Sitting at the far end of the long glass table was not just the board, but David himself, dressed in a sharp suit, calmly waiting for him. Mark stopped dead in his tracks. His jaw dropped as he looked at David, who was sitting quietly next to the CEO. The boardroom was dead silent. Every member of the board was staring at Mark with cold, furious eyes. "What is he doing here?" Mark stammered, pointing a shaking finger at David. "Mr. Sterling, this man is a criminal. He sabotaged our company." Mr. Sterling didn't say a word. He simply gestured toward the large projector screen on the wall. Sarah stood up, holding a remote control. "Mark, we are not here to discuss David," she said sternly. "We are here to discuss your financial records." With a click of a button, the screen lit up. Bright red charts, saved emails, and bank ledgers filled the display. The files clearly showed Mark's signature on monthly transfers, moving funds from the IT maintenance budget into his personal accounts. "You canceled the automated core security license 2 months ago to boost your quarterly bonus," Sarah explained to the board. "The system didn't crash because of a virus. It shut down automatically because the unpaid license finally expired at precisely 4 o'clock yesterday." Mark's face turned completely white. His hands trembled so violently that he dropped his folder, scattering fake papers across the floor. "This is a setup!" Mark shouted desperately. "David fabricated these documents! He is trying to frame me!" David slowly stood up, looking Mark straight in the eyes. His voice was calm, clear, and steady. "I didn't fabricate anything, Mark. Those are official bank records and server logs. The system doesn't lie." Mr. Sterling slammed his hand onto the long conference table. "You lied to me, Mark. You blamed an innocent man while your own greed destroyed our business. You cost this company millions of dollars." "Please, sir, give me another chance," Mark pleaded, his voice breaking as he looked around the room. "I can fix the servers. Just give me a few hours." "You can't fix anything, Mark," David said quietly. Because you never understood how the system worked in the first place. Mr. Sterling turned to David, his tone suddenly desperate. David, please. We made a terrible mistake. We will pay you double your previous salary. Name your price. Just bring our network back online right now. David looked at the CEO, then turned his gaze toward Mark, who was sweating heavily in the corner. I won't be coming back as an employee, David stated firmly. If you want my help, you will sign a private consulting contract with my new firm, and my fee is $500,000. The board members looked at each other in shock, while Mark stared at David in total horror, realizing he had lost all his power. The board members didn't hesitate for a single second. Mr. Sterling immediately signed David's consulting contract, agreeing to the $500,000 fee on the spot. David took a small metallic flash drive from his pocket, walked over to the main terminal in the boardroom, and plugged it in. He entered a complex 16-digit security code and pressed enter. Within seconds, the giant projector screen flashed green. Across the entire building, computer monitors flickered back to life, phones began ringing, and trading systems restored completely. The entire crisis was over in less than 2 minutes. Mr. Sterling turned toward Mark, his face cold and filled with disgust. Mark, you are fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building. Before Mark could even open his mouth to speak, 2 uniformed police officers, the same officers who had searched David's apartment earlier, stepped into the boardroom. Mark, you are under arrest for grand corporate fraud and financial embezzlement, the lead officer declared, placing metal handcuffs around Mark's wrists. As the officers pulled Mark out of the room, Mark looked at David with desperate, tear-filled eyes. David, please, tell them it was a mistake. I have a family. Help me. David stood quietly, watching his former boss get dragged down the hallway in handcuffs. You brought this upon yourself, Mark, David said calmly. You thought you could destroy my life to fill your own pockets. Actions have consequences. As news of Mark's arrest spread through the building, David's former colleagues cheered quietly in the hallways, relieved that the toxic manager was finally gone. A month later, David used his massive payout to launch his own independent cybersecurity firm. He hired his former overworked colleagues from the IT department, offering them fair wages, respect, and a healthy work environment. Standing in his high-floor office overlooking the city skyline, David looked at the glowing server monitors around him. He had lost his job, faced false criminal charges, and nearly lost everything. But by staying patient, keeping his cool, and letting truth guide his actions, justice was served, completely and perfectly.